सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Poverty is a highly politicized issue. And you know what? Wouldn't you rather that it remains this way, because you'd much rather have debate politics around removal of poverty, reduction of poverty, improvement in people's lives, than about so many other faltu things which are also important but not as important as improvement in our quality of life. Now, one reminder of this issue comes from data, and that data comes from very credible sources. This is a report called Global Multidimensional Poverty Index that is released every year by UNDP, that is United Nations Development Programme, and OPHI, Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. So these two organizations produce this report which takes data. Now the important thing to remember is that these two organizations are not collecting their own data. So they are not conducting surveys of their own and looking for data, because after all these are sovereign countries. They've looked at 110 countries and they mine the data available from those countries. Now that creates its own complications, because all countries don't hold their surveys at the same time. All countries have a varying degree of quality with their data. Some have data available till say 2019, some have till 2021, which is the case for example with India, say Pakistan till 2017, 2019, Bangladesh also. And then you go to sub-Saharan Africa, where most of the world's poverty is, and again data for various periods is available or not available. For India, the data is available from 2005-06 onwards. For many other countries, it isn't. It only becomes available later. So a straight mangoes for mangoes, or what used to be called apples for apples, as usual in India I call it mangoes for mangoes, that comparison is not always possible. Yet broad indicators are available. So the latest report, which is Global Multidimensional Poverty Index of 2023, has come out. It's titled Unstacking Global Poverty, Data for High Impact Action. If you look at this, it reminds you that in the Sustainable Development Goals, it was targeted that one of the achievable things by 2030 was the eradication of what is called as multidimensional poverty. Now, multidimensional poverty is different from the conventional definition of poverty. In India, it was called the Tendulkar line of poverty. There were other indicators of economic poverty. For example, even the UN said until the last survey, they used to say $1.90 a day. Now it's $2.15 a day. So that's if you are just under 200 rupees a day, you are below the poverty line. But that's only economic poverty or only monetary poverty. Multidimensional poverty looks at many indicators from health, education, quality of life, assets. I will give you a breakup of that as we go along. So if you look at all that, SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals, these had targeted eradication of this poverty by 2030. As things stand today, this survey tells us that 1.1 billion people, that is 110 crore people in the world, are still living below the poverty line by the definitions of this multi-dimensional poverty. The important thing, however, is that many countries have reduced their poverty very greatly. Now, if you look at a country like India, for example, India has done a fantastic job of it. In India, for example, in 2005-06, 55% of our population, 55% of our population was below the poverty line according to this multidimensional poverty definition. By 2015-16, this had halved to 27.7. By 2019-21, for which data is available mainly from NFHS 5, National Family Health Survey 5, it came down to 16.4%. So if you begin with 2005, then 1 in 2 Indians, in fact more than 1 in 2 Indians in a way, were living below the poverty line. By 2015-16, it was 1 in 4. And by 2021, it became 1 in 6. So that's a very big improvement. And similarly, improvements were made by other countries as well and other regions as well. However, this survey also tells us where does poverty lie in the world. Poverty is very heavily concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. At this point, if there are 110 crore people living below the poverty line, below the multidimensional poverty line, 53.4 crore of them are living in sub-Saharan Africa. But you know what? Which is the second worst region? That is our region. South Asia, as this survey, the UN describes it, or the Indian subcontinent, which is how I prefer to put it. So 53.4 crore of these abject poor live in sub-Saharan Africa. 38.9 crore still live in South Asia or the Indian subcontinent, which is really a shame because the region could have done or should have done a lot better. Now, other countries in the region have made progress. Pakistan has made progress, although data is only available till 2017. Pakistan's poverty line, again according to this definition, has come down from 44.5% in 2012 to 38.3% in 2017. So you can see a decline. Similarly, there's been a decline in Bangladesh as well. But overall, 38.9 crore of these abject poor live in the Indian subcontinent. 38.9 crore in the Indian subcontinent, about 23 crores, maybe a little more than 23 crore reside in India. In terms of absolute numbers, it is still the largest number of poor people for any country in the world. But that's because it is such a large population. India is such a large population, so the base is that much higher. Now, if you might recall, last year when the same report for 2022 had come out, we had done another episode of Cut The Clutter talking about many of these issues and specifically in detail about India. I am sharing a link to that episode with you. That was numbered 1097. So if you want to read or watch more about Indian data, you can go back to that. It is the same data. From India, no fresh data has been made available to UNDP after that. But if you look at this report now, you can find many other important indicators about the entire world and about India as well. So see, for example, one, this report tells us that higher the incidence of poverty in a country or a region, the higher is the intensity. What is the intensity? Intensity is if there are so many indicators of deprivation or so many dimensions of poverty, the more dimensions you suffer from, that gives you a percentage. So if it's below 33%, it's light, then it gets more intense, and as it goes higher and higher, there are regions in the world where it gets up to 90% to 100%. So that is how the intensity of poverty goes up. So wherever you have a large number of poor people living in one area, intensity also tends to be higher. That is one, also sounds reasonable. Number two, what follows from this is that if 110 crore people in the world live below this poverty line now, about half of these, or maybe 45% of these, that is 48.5 crore people, live in severe poverty. That is in high intensity poverty, which means where deprivation or weighted deprivation. Weighted means where weightage is applied to each factor of deprivation. That is between 50 to 100%. Then follows further that 99 million, that is 9.9 crores, say about 10 crore of people are deprived in all three dimensions, and they suffer from 70 to 100% weighted deprivation. What these dimensions are, we'll show you in a chart. In fact, look at the chart. I will also explain it for you. The chart will come back. These dimensions are health, education, and living standards. And the next point that follows from this is 10 million of the 12 million people who live in the highest deprivation score. that is 90 to 100% deprivation, they live in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, see some more striking data. 50% of 1.1 billion, that is 110 crore poor people in the world, 50% or 56.6 crores, 566 million are children under the age of 18. It so happens that poorer people also tend to have higher fertility rates. So 56.6 crores out of this 110 crore really poor people across the world are children under the age of 18. 84% of all poor people live in rural areas. So once again, this is something that we have known for a long time, that people in urban areas tend to be less poor or tend to suffer less from poverty. There can be a lot of poor people in the cities as well, but poverty is much more intense in the rural areas. In fact, if we cut this data only for India, in India, almost 90% of the really poor people in India live in rural areas. Just about 10% live in urban areas. That once again reminds us of the need to urbanize, something that politically is not very fashionable in a country like India. None of our leaders talks about building cities. In fact, the odd leader who might have talked about building a city, say Chandrababu Naidu in Andhra, they've paid a price for it. They've paid a price for it politically. So before we proceed with the rest of the data, let me also highlight one happy data point for you, which is of the 110 countries surveyed, 25, as many as 25 have halved or more than halved their poverty rate in 15 years. So maybe it's not a perfect world, but a lot of good things are happening in the country. Now, understand this multidimensional poverty. We explained this in episode 1097, but I am doing it again very briefly. And see this chart. Some of these charts we are taking from the UNDP report. Some of these charts my colleagues have done in the print newsroom. So this chart is from the UNDP report. This tells you about the 3 dimensions of poverty, that is health, education and living standards. Under health, you get nutrition and child mortality. Under education, we have years of schooling and school attendance. And under living standards, we have cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing and assets. Right? These are very important data points, and I will come back to it in just a bit when we talk about India specifically. Then where do the world's poor live? Again, look at these charts. We've taken these from the UNDP report. These tell you, the first pie chart tells you where do the world's poor live, and you can see that 47.8% of them live in sub-Saharan Africa. But at the same time, look at South Asia. A lot of them live in South Asia as well. That is 38.9 crores or 34.9% of the poor live in South Asia. So these two regions account for a lot of the world's absolute poor. Again, the second pie chart tells you the same regions, the same respective regions share of the world population. The Indian subcontinent has 30.9% of the world's population, but unfortunately about the same percentage or maybe a little bit higher percentage than that of the world's poverty. So once again, so ours is the region that despite its talent and despite its many privileges, including great education system, etc., still punches way below its weight. Now I will share the next set of charts with you. So look at this chart again from the UNDP report. This is the intensity of poverty chart. Again you see where does India feature there. These are complex charts and I am not going into each country, but these charts on your screen are on your screen. This video is with you. You can refer to them anytime you feel like. And I am also sharing the full UNDP report with you. So you can read that as well. Now if you look at poverty intensity, for example, look at this graphic. This tells you that India still has a high poverty intensity of 42%, but still it is on the lower end of this poverty index. If you want to see the worst side of it, you have to go to sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see Niger, which is the worst at almost about 70%, followed by Chad, then followed by Central African Republic. Mozambique is somewhere there. Also Ethiopia. It's also a bit sad given the fact that some of these countries, in fact most of these countries are very mineral rich, but they also suffer from what is called as the resource curse, because these minerals combined with poor governance, no democracy, etc. in most of these countries, dictatorships, internal wars, these also invite foreign powers. The Chinese have got to many of these areas with nothing else on their minds but their minerals, and that's not doing very much for the people of these areas. See what's happening in Ethiopia, for example. There's been a war going on there for a very long time. If you look at the next chart now, this tells you where severe poverty is distributed. Once again, it's a color-coded chart. Blue is the least worst or the best, and deep red is the worst. If you look at the deep red, the good thing is that the Indian subcontinent, or what is described as South Asia in this case, there the deep red is just a tiny, very narrow, thin strip, which is very good for our region. Sub-Saharan Africa is the worst off, and once again you can see on the chart, it's self-explanatory, various colors and various levels of intensity, and you can see how this severe poverty is distributed across the regions. The next chart now gives you the urban-rural split, and once again you can see that in all regions of the world, there are many more poor people living in rural areas than in urban areas. It's only in sub-Saharan Africa where the percentage of poor people living in urban areas is also high, relatively high. Still a vast majority live in rural areas. But in the Indian subcontinent, for example, you can clearly see that urbanization has helped remove or reduce multidimensional poverty. So this was a look at the state of the world, state of poverty in the world, and as we can see, a lot of progress has been made, and yet a lot needs to be done. You want to know something about some individual countries? I can give you some data. If you look at India, in India 415 million, that is 41.5 crore people have been moved out or pushed out of poverty between 2005-06 and 2019-21. That's fantastic. Large number of people have also come out of poverty, say in China, which is a much richer country than India. So 7 crore people in China between 2010 and 2014. China now has very few people below the poverty line. Bangladesh, nearly 2 crore people, that is 19 million people between 2015 and 19 have come out of poverty. Indonesia, 8 million between 2012 and 17. Pakistan, 7 million between 2012-13 and 2017-18, and Nigeria also 5 million between 2018-2020. But Nigeria in fact should be doing a lot better because it is a major oil producer in the world right now. But once again the questions of governance, etc. come in. So that said, you can see that poverty reduction now is a global phenomenon. So having taken this quick look at the state of the world in terms of poverty and poverty reduction, let's also look at these two charts which tells you what's happening with India, what's happening in India with two key indicators, that is under the heads of health and education. Health, we can see nutrition, and you can see improvement from one epoch to the other. The three epochs are 2005-06, 2015-16 and 2019-21. You can see improvement under health on the score of nutrition and child mortality. Similarly, on education, you see improvement in years of schooling and also school attendant as well. Having said that, a lot still needs to be done because 23 crore people living below this multidimensional poverty line in India in 2022-23 is still 23 crores too many.